But at the end of the day, we really need to bring the price of solar down so more people can afford it, not just the wealthiest Americans. Does the federal government have a role to play in helping bring the price down?
Well, essentially everyone has a role to play because the single biggest driver of cost decreases in technology is deployment. R&D is critically important. We have to do it to keep the engine of new innovations going. But the biggest thing out there is the more you deploy, the more the cost comes down. It's the economy of scale argument, where the more companies get used to building something, the more they can find ways to do it better and cheaper. Because of that, federal subsidies, state subsidies, city resources, all of these things that go into making solar energy and wind power and biofuels and everything else more cost effective serves us all in the end. And while many of these technologies start with a clientele that's the more financially well-off, people who already are owning a home so they can invest in these things, or a business that's doing well and has extra capital in the short term and wants to save itself in the long term, we frequently start projects with the more well-to-do clientele. But the more those early adopters get in, the more they can make things affordable for us all. So that feedback of more deployment drops price is a critical thing that the federal government can provide, that some cities can, and that a number of states can as well. So everyone's got an oar in the water, if you will, to pull that along.
So how much is the federal government spending on research and development for different issues?
Well, this is a sad and depressing story for me. And largely because we invest so remarkably little in energy research relative to how big a part of our overall economy is. Energy is the biggest piece of the federal pie. It is the area where we spend the most money, spend the most on imports, and it's the place where, for a bizarre set of reasons, we invest absolutely the least in terms of research and development. In fact, a couple big biotech firms themselves spend more on their research portfolio than does the entire federal government's investment in energy, and the federal government invests about $4 billion in energy. Sadly, that level of underinvestment relative to a $1 trillion annual industry has told the private sector that investing in research is also not of use to them. Because the federal government's not going to do it, then why should private firms take part when we're in a country when the federal authority has said we're not really serious about this? So our private sector doesn't invest. And we know that, in fact, active, aggressive programs by the federal government spur some dramatic investments in the private sector. During the 1990s, our national health budget was doubled through a very carefully orchestrated program where universities, private entrepreneurs, the federal government all mapped out a plan to double the National Institutes of Health budget. The result of that was that private sector investment went up by a factor of 11 or 12 because they saw a federal government that was serious about an area, that saw it as an area of growth and not as some sort of crazy dead end. So until the federal government recognizes that it's simply investing too little, not only to meet its own needs, but also by it's sending the wrong signal to industry, we have a system which is stalemated in nobody's innovating. And that's just a huge loss for the United States and, in fact, for the whole global economy, because the United States is a major driver of research when it wants to do that.
How much is the federal government spending on research and development for, say, the military compared to energy?
The military research budget is massive. We don't even know all of it because some of it's a so-called black budget that we never see, that gets approved in secure hearings where you have to have a clearance to get in. The publicly available federal military research budget is over $40 billion. So it's 10 times as large as we're investing in energy. And that's only the part that we can easily keep track of. There are many programs that aren't even secret that can be gauged as research and that even up that number more. Now, there's no question that there are international security threats and we need to invest in research, but arguably energy is our biggest international security issue, and yet we invested at this paltry level, which has absolutely turned off the private sector, hasn't driven innovation. And in fact, many of the technologies that are being commercialized around the world, solar energy in Germany and Japan, wind turbines across Europe, a number of new technologies in combined heat and power in a variety of areas, are actually ideas that were developed at U.S. universities' national labs, not commercialized here because of this federal disinterest, and have become the basis of huge companies overseas. The world's largest wind company is a Danish firm named Vestas, and they are commercializing a technology developed in the United States that was essentially tried in a very mild way when it first came out. And that wind turbine design and the sort of products that came out after that were in fact commercialized in Europe, and we're now buying those turbines back. So it's bad energy policy, it's bad economic policy, and it's bad for the climate that the United States just hasn't gotten this process in gear.